So thank you everybody for coming. For those of you who are not familiar, we're the Habura. The Habura is an international Bet Midrash. Most of our classes are on Zoom. We have both Hebrew and English divisions. And Rabbi Dweck is the Rosh Bet Midrash, and we're very happy that he's here in Israel for a very short time to visit us, and that we were able to put this collaborative event together with BaBayit. I think it's a great opportunity to hear from the Rabbi. The Habura is an international Bet Midrash that is dedicated to providing shiurim in Torah, Machshava, philosophy, Tanakh, Halakha, a bunch of different topics. We have multiple classes a week. Hebrew class once a week, English class about two English classes a week. A lot of different things going on. In addition, we also have in-person events all over the world. You're more than welcome to join our WhatsApp group and to get updates about the Habura. If you're interested in the English division of the Habura, so we sent out, I think a link to the English Habura WhatsApp group was in the link that got sent out with the source sheet that also was sent out to you guys, right? So the source sheet for tonight, so if you want to follow along, you can follow along there. And for the Hebrew one, you can also come to me. I'll send you the Hebrew one. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Dweck, who told me to keep the introduction very short. So I'll respect his word and try to keep it very short. So Rabbi Dweck, originally from LA, he studied at Hazon Ovadia under Hacham Ovadia Yosef for several years. And today he is the senior rabbi of the Sephardic and Portuguese community in London, and of the Sephardic community of the UK. And of course he's the head of the Habura. And so thank you very much for coming, and
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Eli for giving me the opportunity to be able to do this and bringing this together, and Neely. And to all of you, thank you for being here tonight, for taking some time to share some Divrei Torah. I especially thank Eli because not only of tonight, but also all of the work that he does with the Hebrew side of the Habura, which really, genuinely, without him, it simply would not exist. And so I'm very grateful on behalf of all of us for all of the work that you do, and Yiratzon, that you have continued Koach, Lasot, Hayil, Mehail Hayil, to be Marbitz Torah Barabim, and to be able to meet Zaket Arabim, Bezrat Hashem. So, without further ado, we have a fairly major subject to deal with tonight. And the only reason that I thought maybe we would discuss this tonight is because parasha of this week is Yitro, and the first of the Aseret Diberot is Anochi Adonai Elohecha, which is a problem. Because who is that? And what does it mean? And how are we supposed to deal with it? And it's a simple, 3 words. Ani Adonai Elohecha. Immediately it's qualified with Asher Hotziticha Meretz Mitzrayim. And throughout the generations we have to deal with what it is that means to us. How do we understand Yod Ke Vav Ke, which is what is presented in that pasuk. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Anochi, he doesn't say Ani, he says Anochi. Essentially saying, this is not what I'm doing or acting as, this is what I am. And one of the greatest, perhaps most famous treaters, right? One of the most famous speakers, developers, presenters of that question was HaRambam. HaRambam spent a huge amount of his writing dealing with what is God, and how are we supposed to relate to God, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The subject, or essentially the title of what it was that I wanted to share with you tonight, was a question that is essentially post-HaRambam. Did HaRambam distance us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Chas Shalom. And I say that, obviously, with trepidation, but the question is an important question, which I want to kind of consider with you tonight. I don't know what you will think of it at the end. I'm not even sure what I think of it at the end, but I do think that there is a way for us to approach it, a way for us to be able to understand it, that at least for me was an important development, and therefore I share it with you. And you do with it what it is that you will when you leave. but nonetheless I shared it. Why would I ask such a question? Right? Why would I even conjure that up? HaRambam's HaRambam. I mean, who did more than HaRambam in order to be able to present the entirety of Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh and its entire framework and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Avodah and our Jewish life than HaRambam did? I don't know. I honestly can tell you, I really don't know who came close to HaRambam doing any of that. Not to say that there aren't others, but again, you probably know a bit about me. Cursory, I'm a Rambamnik. And for me, HaRambam is it. He's where it's at. He's the center, and then everything else that I do, I kind of learn and study around. But again, I'm just making disclaimers over here. I'm being honest and putting it all out there. This is me, right? This is how I look. And I still have to ask that question. I still have to ask the question with all that HaRambam presented to us, and we will look at it, right? We're going to look at this broadly. Is there not some element of potential alienation that in HaRambam's presentation is very stark, clear presentations of what we mean when we say God? Did that not somehow create some kind of an alienation, or does it potentially, possibly, bring in an aspect of alienation? So I want to treat that with you tonight. Before we look at them, so do you have links for a source sheet? You might be, right? Where might some people find links for a source sheet?
The BaBayit events group on WhatsApp.
Right.
Or the Habura Anglo group.
Okay.
Or the Facebook page in the comment on the live stream.
So just in case you don't have any of these or not on these groups and it's hard for you to bring it up, I'm going to read for you so you'll follow with me. And then we can make it further available, I suppose, for anybody who wants to kind of look up some of the sources that I dealt with. But before we go into HaRambam's specific issue, I'm going to preempt it with a bit of an intro, right? Broad presentation of HaRambam's thinking before we actually look at it in terms of the text. What did HaRambam really want to present? What did HaRambam really want to keep us away from? Well, the bottom line is HaRambam didn't want us to worship Avodah Zarah. That's the bottom line. And as far as HaRambam is concerned, Avodah Zarah equaled praying to a God that isn't God. So if when I am thinking of God, I am thinking of the wrong thing, and I'm praying to that thing, serving that thing, I'm worshiping Avodah Zarah. HaRambam made no qualms about this. I mean, he was very straightforward about this. There were others who said, well, I mean, sometimes it takes time for people to grow, and they have to realize, and Hanach lahem Yisrael, Imam Nevi'im b'nei Nevi'im, and so on and so forth. HaRambam really had no time for that because he was very concerned about the fact that people, at the very least, were magshimim haboreh, which means they were anthropomorphizing. They were, in simple terms, making God into a physical entity of sorts. So even if they thought about him as being extremely ethereal, extremely spiritual, but limited with some sort of body, with some sort of form, and so on and so forth, they were off. They were off. And already we missed God. So what HaRambam needed to do was he could very easily say, this is what God is. Which he did. But then there was another problem. The other problem is that there's Torah, the Torah, which throws a wrench into everything that HaRambam presented. Because when HaRambam says HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no body, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no limbs, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not limited, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have emotions, and we'll see that in a minute, right? The body thing people have they're okay with. The emotions thing is very much a problem for most of us, right? Which we'll see. When HaRambam says all of those things, you then read the Torah, and it says, Yad Adonai hoya b'miknecha, right? The hand of God is in, right? Yad hazaka b'zron, Einei Adonai Elohecha ba mereshit hashana v'ad acharit hashana, and so on and so forth, right? By har af Adonai, and so on. Yeah? Those are the physical aspects, right? Not to mention the emotional aspects. HaKadosh Baruch Hu El Kanahu. Yeah, he's a jealous God, a zealous God, a zealous God, whatever it is. These are emotions. These are human experiences that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is using. You know how I chastise you, which is already a problem. How do you chastise if you're right? Well, it's like your parent chastises a child. That's how I do it. Comparing directly to human experience. Right? And then you go to, that wasn't good. And then you go to, it's a good thing it's water, it dries. You go to the Nevi'im, and it's even more than that. Yasis alayich Elohaich, kimsos hatan al kala. So now we're having, mutual love between a hatan and a kala. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with us. He chastises us over not treating him like we would treat other people we respect. So it says in Malachi, right? Talks to Malachi, the last Navi. You bring me korbanot, iver, piseach, enra, right? You bring me blind korbanot, limping korbanot. You say it's not a big deal. Bottom line. He said, hakriveu na lepechatecha. Why don't you try doing that with your governor? Hayirtzecha? Hayisab panecha? Will he accept it from you? Will he even look at you if you bring it? You're lucky you don't get in trouble for doing something like that. Yeah, but you're God. You're not pechatecha. You're with me, right? So HaRambam has an issue because whatever it is that he's saying doesn't seem to be how these things are presented in Torah. So now what does HaRambam have to do? He has to explain Torah. And say to us, Dibirat is one of HaRambam's most favorite lines to use from Chachamim. Dibirat Torah kelushon b'nei adam. Which means that the Torah spoke in human terms. So the concepts that really have no human application, presentation, manifestation of sorts, right, in any human way, is nonetheless adapted to your human screen. And it's used and spoken in human terms. And what you must do when you read that is strip away the human terms and recognize that it's just a casing for these things that are really not as they seem. And HaRambam basically spends pages and pages and pages in the Moreh Nebuchim, in the Mishneh Torah, dealing with these issues in various ways. He has to talk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have a hand. When we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Gadol, Gibor, Nora, say it every single day. In Tefillah, right? Every single day, if we're good, 3 times a day, we say Ha'el, HaGadol, HaGibor, HaNora, and so on and so forth. HaRambam says, yes, Gadol, but not Gadol. Which means what? It's what we call in English negative attributes. What does HaRambam say? No, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Gadol, but in no way that you know Gadol. Because whatever you know is Gadol is human. It's physical. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not Gadol, like you think he's Gadol. But he's also not Gadol. And that's how you have to think every time that you use any kind of an attribute for him. That's HaRambam's approach, right? He is Norah, but not in any way that you possibly can understand Norah. But he's also not Norah. So welcome to, again, we're just opening here because we can't do a shiur in this. I'm assuming that you have some element of knowledge of this, and if not, it's good. Let's go learn it. It's worth learning. But this is the beginnings of the world of HaRambam. So what is left for me if I follow HaRambam's direction to its furthest conclusion? Well, let's read. And when we read, I do want you to consider how this makes you feel. Just in general. Maybe that you know this so long and you've dealt with it and you're done with it and it's fine. It's like, a scoop of chocolate, scoop of vanilla, not a big deal. But it could be, maybe, it makes one feel uncomfortable. I will tell you that whenever I teach this, everybody has a horrible day, usually a horrible week, after I teach this. So have a look. So if you're on the thing, have a look at Gimal, right, on the source sheet. There's the third entry, Mishneh Torah Choyesodot Torah Yud Aleph, and the second one we're also going to read. So HaRambam has just finished saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no body, has no physical attributes, doesn't have anything that happens to physical bodies in any way. He's just finished presenting that. And then he says, וכיוון שהתברר שאינו גוף וגבייה, יתברר שלא ירא לו אחד ממראות הגופות. Since we've established that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a body, in any form, in any way, nothing physical or body-like can occur to him because he doesn't have that condition. And then he proceeds to start articulating this. Lo hibur velo pirud. He can't come together in any way nor be split apart in any way. There are no parts. Lo makom velo midah. He doesn't live in a space. He doesn't occupy space with coordinates. No measure. Lo aliyah velo yirdah. It doesn't go up or down. There is no such thing. Like ala Elohim b'tru'ah, yeah? We say no ala, no aliyah velo yirdah. None of that, yeah? Lo yamin velo simol. There's no right or left. Right of what? Left of what? If there's no space, then there's no coordinates and no things. There's no right or left, obviously. Lo panim velo achor. No front and back. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu talks that way. V'natati panai. Right? I'm going to bring my face to that person. V'rayita et achorai u'fanai lo yirau. Right? I'm talking about all of that. Right? And yastir panai. And so on. Okay, but no. Lo panim v'lo achor. Lo yeshiva v'lo amidah. There's no sitting or standing. So there's no yeshiva al kisei din, yeshiva al kisei rahamim. None of that, obviously. I'm saying. Okay, none of that. Eno matzui bizman. Nor is he temporal. He is outside of time. Which already our brains fall out when we start with that. Right? That's where we stop. I mean, there's nothing to do about that. But nonetheless, he is not time. He is outside of time. If he's outside of time, there's no beginning or end. Obviously, nor is there how did he get there. It's a bad question. It doesn't apply. Yeah. Now, he then says, skip a line. En lo mavet lo hayim, no death or life. Okay. Lo sichlut v'lo chokhmah, no ignorance or wisdom. Ke chokhmat ha'ish hacham, like a wise person we might know. And then he says, lo ka'as v'lo sirok. Now he's getting into really, we're in nervous territory. Because these are philosophical issues we don't get, we get it, we don't get, we get that, we don't get it. Right? We get that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not in time, but we don't get how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're fine with that. Okay, we'll stop asking questions. But then there are aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that make HaKadosh Baruch Hu personal. And what HaRambam says to us is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't get angry. Even though it seems in the Torah that he does get angry, and he wants us to know that he's angry, he doesn't really get angry. He'll get angry, he doesn't laugh. He's not happy either. He has no happiness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nor does he get sad. Even though it says Vayita'atzev el libo, right? Also very weird, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no heart, his head, that's it. Okay? Why do I keep doing that? I keep doing that to show you the massive issue that Rambam has, right? In the Torah, with everything that he's saying. It's not like Torah had a line or two that Rambam had to deal with. I mean, the entirety of Torah is replete with everything not that HaKadosh, everything anti what HaRambam is saying. And so he continues. Lo shetika velo dibur, ke dibur b'nei adam. So that's where people have a bad day. Why? Because I've just told them that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have any of these emotions, right? He doesn't have any of these feelings. Which HaRambam didn't write this, but of course it's included. HaKadosh Baruch Hu also doesn't love. Yeah, that leaves a mark. That's a problem. So you can imagine that this ruins people's day, or their week, or their life. Because if this is what I come away with, right, how am I supposed to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And now you can understand why I asked the question. Did HaRambam distance us, or alienate us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So, the reality is that if I read this halakha, and I leave you with this halakha, and for all intents and purposes, HaRambam essentially, in the proper works, left us with this halakha. And the reason why he left us with this halakha is because he did not want anyone, to him it was more important that you shouldn't worship Avodah Zarah. Better not to worship the wrong God than to struggle with being able to connect to God. That's his, right? Now, I believe that HaRambam did, in a sense, address this, but you had to do more work to be able to get how HaRambam ultimately addresses this. And I think that that's work that's important for us to do, which is what really I'd like to do with you tonight. To at least signal to you, because we don't have enough time, but we'll signal to you. What is the direction of being able to accommodate HaRambam's, of course, very true points? And his points are, of course, very true, given what it is we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Because if we recognize that when we say Hashem, or when we say God, or whatever term that we use for God, that what we are talking about, according to HaRambam, is the Matsui Rishon, which is how HaRambam presents it at the opening of the Mishneh Torah. He's very careful, right? Pay attention. If you read the opening of the Mishneh Torah, so the Torah, he does not say, and now I want to talk to you about God. He says, Yesod ha-Yesodot v'amud ha-Chochmot, which he alludes to as Yod Ke Vav Ke, Yesod ha-Yesodot, right? It's a hint. V'amud ha-Chochmot, Leda sheyesh sham, he doesn't say Eloah, that there is a God. He does not say that. He intentionally does not say that. He says, sheyesh sham matsui rishon. And what that means is that there is, literally, yesh sham, there is primal being. What does that mean? A first being. Something that existed and exists, that is first. First meaning before anything else. Now, that is really all HaRambam needs to say in order for us to be able to extrapolate then what we're talking about, but HaRambam unpacks it. Because then the question, of course, is, what would being first mean? Well, it would mean, obviously, everything that HaRambam just said. Because you can't say that there would be place or space that this first being is in, because then the space would be the first thing, and then that's what we would mean when we say God. We've just defined that whatever it is that I'm talking about is the first entity. The first entity is, by definition, the only thing. Can't be two, can't be limited, can't be confined in any kind of body of any type of sort. Obviously. First must be absolute infinite. In English, we call this a necessary being. Necessary meaning it's not contingent. Contingent means it relies on something for its being. This is simply being, or probably more accurate, pre-being. And so once I say first, and it's interesting because HaRambam in the Pirush Mishnah, when he goes through the 13 Ikarim, he makes that number 4. And he changed his mind. In the Yesodei Torah, he starts with that one because it's better to start with that one logically. Because if you start with that one, then usually everything else flows. By the 5th halacha, HaRambam finally says, oh, by the way, Matsui Zeh, that we've been talking about, Hu Eloah ha'olam adon kol ha'aretz. That's God. Why does he do that? Why does he come around from the back? Because he does not want, when he says God, that for you to insert what you already have in your mind as the definition of that. He wants to define it. So he is going to define it and then tell you, oh, by the way, that's God. You with me? So, in order for HaRambam to be able to present that to us, this is the definition. That's what God is. So if that's what God is, then of course everything HaRambam is saying is absolutely true. But if that's the case, well, how on earth are we supposed to relate to this entity? The reality is that this is not something that is meant to be addressed or achieved by everybody. There was one person in Torah who really got this. And because this one person really got this, God spoke to him very, very freely. That was Balaam. Balaam had no problems with any of this. He was perfectly fine with all of this. And therefore, he didn't project anything onto God. He didn't expect that God needed to do anything, be any way. He didn't expect either that God had any expectations for him. Why would he? It's completely removed. Human beings and God have nothing in common. Nor would we expect that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would care much about what it is. So he's being creative. He made us, and that's great. And he reserves the right as a necessary being to do that. And so, thank you. And so on and so forth. What Bilam did not anticipate is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was interested in some kind of bridging the gap. How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do that? We have absolutely no idea. Is it a paradox? Yes, it is. But mind you that it is the same paradox that keeps hitting up against God any time that we think about God. It's just a different form. So, for example, the paradox that is famously raised, that HaRambam raises, in fact. How does God know all things simply by being God and us have free choice? You know that one, right? Yeah. Everybody gets all twisted into a knot with that one. But nobody's bothered by how does God exist and we exist. It's the same paradox. I mean, he's all there is, right? Where exactly was there room made for anything other than him to be? And did he do this? Is this an action? Did he choose in time at one point to create when there's no time? And you follow, right? I mean, and yet the only reason we don't have a problem really with that paradox, although people do, I'm saying we're not torn up by it, is because experientially we just deal with it. Why? Because here we are. And there he is. I mean, yes, you could imagine, you can disbelieve either one of those things, right? You could either disbelieve that he is or disbelieve that you are, and people, I met both. But if you are okay, right, and you recognize the reality of your own being, and you recognize that you're not the first being, there had to be a first, right? Well, then okay, it's a paradox, and you don't know how it happened, but here it is. And here we are. And it's okay, because nobody died from a paradox. Paradoxes are part of reality. And it's okay if we don't know exactly how it is that it all happens, because you're a meat brain like me. And we just do the best we can with what we've got. And we do some pretty remarkable things with our meat brains, but there are limits. There are limits. All I have to do is talk to you about a fourth or fifth dimension, you realize that already you're, right? And we just hit up against the hard stop right there. We're not, Because whatever it is that we're going to theorize is going to be in 3 dimensions at the end of the day, no matter how much it is that we look at it in terms of abstractions. It's still confined. And as is clearly pointed out by so many, HaRambam included, we only think in human terms, surprise, because we're humans. And we are not able to think in any other terms, even though we forget that sometimes. And so what HaRambam points out is the reason why the Torah speaks to us the way that it does is because it really does embrace our humanity. For it not to speak like that would mean for it not to respect and recognize the reality of our humanity as being there and present in full. Because after all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not bump into a bunch of humans and think, oh no, what am I going to do with these people? No, the belief is that he made us. This is what he had planned. This situation, right? And we just are not able to think outside of human terms. What we can do as human beings is recognize that my brain does not understand God. It never will. But the minute that I accept that I will not ever understand God, and I know why, because I'm talking about primal existence, right, first being, well then that's enough. And I get what Rambam is saying to me over here. That's all he wants us to know. And once I get that, the Torah is not an issue. Because I understand that, interestingly, paradoxically, weirdly, the Torah does tell me one thing over and over and over and over again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is interested in a relationship with us. How? I don't know, but I know that the beauty of the Torah is that it provides opportunities for me to be able to be in a relationship with him because it tells me how. which we don't have time for today to get into, but it's one of the reasons why HaRambam includes Nebu'ah, prophecy, in the Ikarim. Why does prophecy need to be included in the Ikarim? Because without it, I don't hear from him. And if I don't hear from him, I have no way of connecting to him. None. Because whatever it is that I decide is the way that I'm going to connect with him is completely and utterly locked into my human experience and condition. There's no way, no indication to me that I'm going to be able to bridge that gap. I can only be told by him how to bridge that gap. And that's why the Nebuah Moshe Rabbeinu is essential in terms of that. Because of its quality. So believe it or not believe it, accept it or not accept it. HaRambam is simply saying, if we're going to do this thing here that we call Torah and mitzvot and so on and so forth, those ikarim are absolutely essential. Without them, the entire thing collapses. And he's absolutely, he doesn't need to say, but he's absolutely right. So everybody questions those ikarim, they're questioning, they're literally starting to pull apart the foundations of an absolutely essential key that the entire edifice falls apart with. Without. So now, if I get what I mean, right, what is meant when we say Matsui Rishon, and everything that comes with that, and I realize that, of course, if I'm going to say Hanun Hu, Rahum Hu, Baruch Hu, Gadol Hu, Norah Hu, whatever it is that I'm going to say, I realize that I am borrowing that term to speak about something that in reality, as it says in Tehillim, Lecha Dumiya Tehillah. To you, Rabbono Shalom, the only real praise is still silence. What could I possibly say? I realize I'm borrowing these terms because this is how I do this as a human being. It's what I do. And guess what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives permission for that. Why? Because for some strange reason, he wants to have a relationship with human beings. And this is the way that we run. So, guess what he did? In the Torah, he spoke our language. And he said, look, you know that feeling, when you feel supported, seen, you have attention that's given to you, there's concern for your welfare. What do you call that? Love. That's what I have for you. That's what I have. Now, how do we know that? It's what we experience. We call that love. Does it matter what's going on inside HaKadosh Baruch Hu? No, it really doesn't matter. The matter is that my experience of it is this, and he calls it that. Because it's what you call it. So when I begin to understand that, I begin to recognize how the bridge between the gaps functions. That what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us in Torah is, I am speaking your language, and I am extending myself into your world. And no, I don't care about the four-legged animals that you put up onto the barbecue for me. It makes no difference. But they're what you have. And yes, use those. Because you are predators. That's how you've developed. And this is the interesting relationship that you have to your domesticated prey. This is meaningful to you. And so you can engage that in your relationship with me. I allow that. But make no mistake, I really am not interested in burning cows. I'm interested in you and your relationship to cows. And how that manifests to your relationship with me. So if you start putting up cows on an altar, bulls on an altar, rams on an altar, what have you, as though I'm interested in this stuff and just get it up there, why don't you try giving it to your governor? You think he'll like it? No, he's not going to like it. You know why? You know why? Because this is not a cow shelter or a cow barbecue. This is a relationship. And these are the modes of the relationship. So the same way that he would pummel you if you did that, I'm going to pummel you if you do it because I care. And when I say I care, what I mean is, You with me? I don't know. It's okay if you're not. This is hard stuff. But it is important. So then you have weird things like this, which sound like they're entirely anti-Maimonidean, right? So now, I've put some psukim on here. If you look at He, Vav, Zayin, He, Tet, right, on the whoever has the sources. They're just examples of HaKadosh Baruch Hu expressing emotion, feelings, thoughts, human examples, and so on and so forth. Why? Because this is the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is relating to us. It doesn't matter what's going on in him. It matters that we are given access to it. And the only way we can be given access to it is through our terms, obviously. How else would it be? What other language would the Torah speak if not human language? If its interest is in connecting to humanity. Whichever cohort of humanity the Torah is interested in dealing with, which is essentially Israel. You can't divorce Israel from the human beings that we are. Why else do you think Yonah was sent to a bunch of goyim in order to be able to encourage them to teshuvah? We don't have a better teshuvah story on Yom Kippur? You know how many teshuvah stories there are in Tanakh? We have to talk about the one where the Nabi is told to go to a nation that's not Israel and have them do teshuvah. This is the kind of centerpiece, right? Minha time, everybody. Why? Why? Because if you don't know that you are human, there's nothing to talk about with regards to being Israel. And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Yonah is, they're human beings. You came from that. If you cannot realize that you came from that and have hakarat tovah to that, you recognize how many people are in that city. It's the end of the book. It's a beautiful ending of the book. It's the only book in Tanakh, by the way, that ends with a question. It's this rhetorical question. You know how many people are in that city or not? They don't know from their right and left. You cared about this little bush that grew for you last night, gave you a little bit of shade. I shouldn't care about this massive city of people. Don't know what they're doing, right or left. Behemah rabah. You know how many animals there are in that city or not? That's the end of the book. Behemah rabah. Which is essential on Kippur. Because on Kippur, what I'm trying to do is to be able to look at who I am. And if all I see is some top-tier Yisrael, and I don't recognize that of the Avodah Zarah you Terach, Avi Avraham, Avi Nahor, then I'm missing the mark terribly. If I don't realize that that is embedded in the animal of this planet, which is why you're putting bulls up on the altar in the first place. Because I know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying that you're animals, and your relationship to them, you don't. And that's your problem. And when I talk to you, I'm talking to you in your terms. Obviously, what other terms would I speak to you in? And I am saying that as long as you know that I am not a human, you can relate to me as a person. There's a very big difference between the two. You can personify me as long as you know that I am not that inherently. There can be an interface. And that's the difference between Avodah Zarah and not Avodah Zarah. When you know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not that thing, right? He's not the Av that's Meyaser Beno. Kasher Yaser Ish et Beno, Adonai Roecha Meyasereka. That's how I do it. That's how it manifests for you. That's how you can reference it. I am not that in me, but you are allowed to relate to me that way as long as you know that that's not what I am. Anochi yod kevavke. You got that? Asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I took you out of Egypt. Now, if I was talking to not you, I might not say those words, but you talk about taking, and you talk about out, and in, and up, and down, and top, and bottom, and right, and left, and all. I'm talking your language, and it's perfectly fine. I do it, you do it, that's the bridge between us. There is an interface that we work with that is human-centered. So I have a podcast, and I had a discussion with a scientist, Donald Hoffman, on this podcast. And his entire study is essentially recognizing that reality is absolutely not in any way the way that we perceive it. And that everything that we perceive, visually, tactily, in every sense, is a user interface to what's actually going on. Mashal madvar domeh. You have apps on your phone, right? You touch a little box, one of these little boxes on your WhatsApp, right? As if it exists there on your phone. It doesn't exist there on your phone. Everybody knows that it's code. And that somewhere in the phone is code for this little thing to manifest on your screen and present to you the code that runs that we call WhatsApp. And somehow it interfaces with us, and I can tap it with my finger, and code is then functioning that opens it and runs, and so on and so forth. But where is WhatsApp on my phone? In that little square? No. But for me, that's where it is, and it's fine. I deal with it. I know that it's not really that. And if you have to ask me, I can kind of recognize, I tell you, obviously that little square is not WhatsApp, right? But it doesn't matter, because once I know that, then I interact with it that way. It's a user interface. And as far as we are concerned, the user interface with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that he is a character in the story. Even though we know he's the code, right? It's code. No interaction. I mean, imagine if you had to interact directly with the code every time that you wanted to use an app. Good luck. You with me? So as long as I know that this is user interface and not the entity, you're good. Not only that, it's how you must relate to it. Good. You can't relate to it any other way, because essentially what HaRambam is saying is, it's all code. Have a nice day. But what he's really saying is, it's all code. Just know that when you tap on it every now and then. You have to tap on it. That's it. There's no other way to use it. You can't use it directly with the code. There's no interface. The interface is the human. And so in that regard, of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a person. He talks about himself as a person in the Torah. He wrote himself into the book. You get it? He's a character in the book. He's got all kinds of names. He's moody, right? He's got different moods. And that is why the Hachamim deal with it that way. So they say, Al Hayam Kegibor, right? On the Yam, Kriyat Yam Suf, he's like a warrior. At Har Sinai, Keshliach Sibur Atuf. One is young, one is old. What does that mean? Of course, what we'd expect it to mean. It's the experience of that, what we call the Matsuri Rishon, in our human terms, however it is that manifests. So have a look at this there's a chapter from Rabbi Sachs over there. I'm not going to read it because it could be a bit confusing, but I want you to go down to 16. 16 is Michael Wishegrod. He wrote a book called The Body of Faith. And he might say that he's an anti-Maimonidean. Maybe he is. I don't know. I don't care. I'm telling you that if you read it in terms that I'm expressing to you, he has very important points. And he writes the following. He says, the God of the Bible is a person. He's one of the characters who appear in the stories told in the Bible. He has a personality, all true, that undergoes development in the course of the story. He creates man with certain expectations, which are apparently disappointed, and he is then sorry that he has created them. He's subject to the emotions of anger, jealousy, among others. He's also filled with burning love, particularly toward Abraham and his descendants. All true. He desires certain things and detests others. The God of Israel has a proper name. There is no fact in Jewish theology more significant than this. And he's right. Because without it, I have no connection. There is no user interface for me. It's all code. And the tradition always understood the significance of this fact, and so surrounded this name with endless mystery, so that it became an ineffable name, because it celebrated the most terrible of all recognitions, the personality of God. To stand before God is to stand before Him who is God and not another. To believe in God is to have a psychological relationship with God. And that HaRambam would agree with. How do I know that HaRambam would agree with that? Because there is one place in which HaRambam takes the extra step. One major place, not the only place, one major place. And says, you need to engage in the user interface. And that is at the end of the Chot Teshuvah. And he writes the following. Take a look at Yud Zayin. I'll read it out loud. He says, you have to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's one of the things that we're supposed to do. We love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the appropriate love? Like appropriate level behavior that we're supposed to have? You should love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, big love. Yetera, exceeding. Azah, very, very powerful, right? Meod, a lot. Okay? To the point that your soul, your very existence, your very life force is tied with that love, with God. You're constantly thinking on it, right? It's on your mind all the time. How? Says HaRambam. This is little touchy territory that he gets into in his own system. Kilu hole holi ha'ahaba, like you're lovesick. She'en da'ato p'niyah me'avato ta'isha, like you can't take your mind off of that woman, right? I'm sorry for the women in the room. It's the same thing, another way around. Okay. Who shogeh b'adri ben shto ben kumo ben b'sha'ah she'ochel v'shoteh? Think about him. Think about the beloved. Eating, can't eat, can't drink, can't sit, it's constantly thinking about the beloved. He's describing infatuation. Yeter mizeh, he says. And then he says this. Hu sheshlomo amar derech mashal ki cholat ahava ani. As Shlomo HaMelech said in Shir HaShirim, I am sick with love. Well, what does that have to do with anything? In Shir HaShirim, it's talking about, and HaRambam says, V'chol Shir HaShirim mashal hu le'inyan zeh. The entirety of Shir HaShirim is to present the love between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Israel. Now, what's interesting, and this is interesting, right? HaRambam very rarely speaks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love for us, which is unfortunate. It's very rare, very stark. He talks all the time about the love that we need to have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the reality is, in his statement over here, is that Shir HaShirim is mashal hu ledavar zeh. What does it mean, mashal hu? He says the entirety of Shir HaShirim, the whole of the book. I imagine you're familiar somewhat, right? If not, definitely crack it open and have a look. The entirety of it is talking about the nature of the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and us. Mashal, yes, it's a mashal, which is precisely what the app is on your phone. Your app on the phone is not a mashal? Of course it's a mashal. It's not the real thing. And what HaRambam is saying is, the whole of Shir HaShirim is a mashal, ledavar zeh. Even the God side to us. Because if you read the story, it's not a one-sided ahava. It's a two-sided story. And that is how we are meant to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So did HaRambam distance us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Potentially, yes. If the only way that we relate to him is as the code, which is a further mashal that I'm using. But what we must understand is that once we understand that it is code, that it is not accessible to us in the way that it is, all we have is the user interface. And I understand that it is a user interface and not the thing. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that my eyes are upon the land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, I recognize that there are no eyes, that it is not, there's no year for him, right? There's eyes for us and year for us. And that is being presented to whatever the code is. For me, that's how I understand. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's got eyes, and he's looking at my land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And I'm allowed to relate to it that way, as long as I know that there's no eyeballs You with me? And when you can do that, when you can divorce the interface from the entity, and then understand that the interface is a means of engaging with the entity, you can then bring them together. If one cannot do that, it's avodah zarah. You understand? It's very subtle. And it's very easy to fall into avodah zarah. That's why I put here a great quote from a Zen master of the 13th century called Dojin. And Dojin says, before one studies Zen, mountains are mountains, waters are waters. After a first glimpse into the truth of Zen, mountains are no longer mountains, waters are no longer waters. After enlightenment, you become a master, mountains are once again mountains and waters are once again waters. Yeah. And that's really, in one line, this whole thing. So I wanted to share with you that yesod, because it's not spoken about very often. And if we're going to take HaKadosh Baruch Hu seriously, then we need to be able to understand how it is that we're supposed to navigate this. And thankfully today we have mishalim that HaRambam just did not have, but helps us really to be able to get it, because the whole world is running in that direction. And so I hope that it helps a bit. And I very much, again, I say thank you so much for taking time to be able to be here, and that we can share some Divrei Torah, and that if we can help in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu just that much more, Hinei ma tov. That we should all be zocheh to Nehamat Zion, that we should see the Binyan, the Beit HaMikdash, the Rabbi Amenu, that should be the source of our relationship and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that Uva L'Tzion Goel Yagel Yaakov Yisma Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom.